The Zulu Girl by Roy Campbell. Now, Roy Campbell was a South African poet, and he was way ahead of his time because he was able to see and tell society through his poetry what was to come. And if we look back historically, we know what happened, but let's move on from there. So, The Zulu Girl. Now, this poem is a powerful yet pathetic, sad recreation of the hardship and endurance of the South African people of that day. Roy Campbell makes the masculine equation. In the example, he says male is equal to culture and female is equal to nurture. And it poses an immediate problem of how miserably the poor South African people are forced to work on farms. And the poem is powerful both in sound and in effect. So before we go into looking at the content, let's have a look at this poem. Listen carefully, follow through on the metaphors, and just see what you can pick up about the Zulu Girl.
When in the sun the red-hot acres smoulder, down where the sweating gang its labour plies, a girl flings down her hoe, and from her shoulder unslings her child, tormented by the flies. She takes him to a ring of shadow, pooled by thorn trees, purpled by the blood of ticks, while her sharp nails, in slow caress ruled, prowl through his hair with sharp electric clicks. His sleep mouth, plugged by the heavy nipple, tugs like a puppy, grunting as he feeds. Through his frail nerves her wan, deep languors ripple, like a broad river sighing through its reeds. Yet in that drowsy stream his flesh imbibes an old, unquenched, unsmotherable heat. The curbed ferocity of beaten tribes, the sullen dignity of their defeat. Her body looms above him like a hill, within whose shade a village lies at rest, or the first cloud, so terrible and still, that bears the coming harvest in its breast.
On the surface of it, the poem The Zulu Girl is simply an observation of a Zulu woman feeding her child after she's been working. But upon closer consideration, it becomes clear that the poem is about oppression, specifically of women. Now, the poem has a 4-line stanza, and the speaker provides us with detail of the plight of the Zulu girl. And the observation made by the speaker is minute and influential. You'll notice that he goes into certain details. So the first stanza gives us, well, that's a bit of a stutter there, gives us a description of a hot landscape where the labourers work. Now it's during the daytime, and the sun sheds hot, hot rays on the ground. Look at the words, the hot red acres. So the farm seems to be under the powerful heat of the sun. It is so parching that the hot red acres, the African landscape, seems to be ready to burst into flames. When we say that something is red hot, it has reached a level of heat that we know it's going to ignite any minute. Now, an interesting choice of words is the word gang. In the field is the gang. Now, the word gang is of course frequently used in this connection, and it suggests that its members have no individuality or identity, but are treated just like prisoners are. They're being made to undertake forced labour, and certainly they have no personal pride or pleasure in the work they're doing, and are actually under some kind of compulsion. Now, the observation goes from the group, the gang, to the girl, who flings down her hoe, which can be seen as an act of defiance. Now, think about that. She's defying the authority over her by a simple act of just throwing her hoe down. And this turns from the mass production to the responsibilities of reproduction. So we had a gang Doing work, we now come all the way round to an individual, from production to reproduction, because she unslings her child from her shoulder. And the child beside her is being tormented by flies. So you can imagine these flies buzzing around the poor child's head. And the child is also in need of nourishment. And then she takes him to a patch of shade nearby and feeds him from her breast. Now, while the child feeds, the girl passes her hand through his hair. Now, it is significant perhaps that the mother is referred to as a girl. Now, this may suggest that she's not a wife. She may belong to a vast group of people. So, does she have an identity of her own? No. She's just another girl who has lost her traditional ways in the chaos of the modern world. The second stanza illustrates the care that the mother shows for her child. She's looking for ticks and lice as she digs through his hair. And this emphasizes the poor conditions under which they are forced to live. In stanza 3, 4, and 5, the poet goes on to give his impression of the relationship and the feeling between the mother and the child in more than just the physical sense. See, the child is grunting as he feeds, and that he is feeding greedily and expressing his simple but deep satisfaction. But here's the catch. Not only is he taking in physical nourishment, but during this process of feeding, her own deep feelings ripple and are conveyed little by little into his frail baby nerves. Now, the poem admirably suggests that the strong, intimate mother and child relationship developed by breastfeeding, and the word languors is important. Now, this tells us that the girl appears weary, unenthusiastic, and even hopeless, as though expressing a deep despair and resentment against the whole situation in which she finds herself. However, even her mood of hopelessness, her motherhood, and the latent satisfaction she has in feeding her child arouse in her a kind of pride. Look at the words, the old, unquenched, unsmotherable heat. It's a feeling perhaps that her life has actually got some value, and she is taking part in an important life process. She's not alone, she's not abandoned, and she belongs to an old, enduring tradition of human struggle and survival. Her tribes, though curbed, and we know that curbed means put aside and put down, still remain and retain their self-respect, and they are ready to rise again. So as this poem develops, we move gradually closer to the mother, until in the final stanza we are looking up at her, almost as though we're looking at her through the eyes of the child. She appears as an impressive, statuesque figure, shielding and protecting her helpless child. And the last two lines of all, after being compared to a hill, she is likened to a great storm cloud which bears the coming harvest in its breast. In the third stanza, while the woman is breastfeeding her child, he is hungry and tugs at her nipple like a puppy. Now, this is an interesting image because it has a dual side to it. It points out that the child could be suckling innocently drinking like a little puppy would. But it also shows how her people are perceived, namely as dogs. And the mother, however, does not see her child in this way because she feels overwhelming tenderness and love for her child. In the fourth stanza, we see that the child is a symbol of the Zulu nation. In him, there is an old, unquenched, unsmotherable heat, and this refers to the fierce warriors of the Zulu tribe. And the strength of the Zulu still exists in the Zulu people, in spite of the oppression that they have experienced. And in the final stanza of the poem, the mother metaphorically becomes a hill that overshadows the whole village. She's no longer the mother of just one child. She represents the mother of all the children of all oppressed people. Now, it's interesting also the analogy to a cloud. We know that a cloud usually brings rain. And when there's rain, after people working in a field, there is growth, there is nourishment, and there's a harvest. Now, this is a metaphor that suggests that the children of the oppressed people will one day reap the harvest of their suffering. In other words, they will overcome the oppression with help from mothers like the Zulu girl in this poem. So, without appealing directly to our emotions, without getting all stirring up and using emotive language, the writer arouses our sympathy for the Zulu girl in the hardships of the existence, and this leads to an admiration for her endurance, for her strength that we can see. And in turn, through the concluding simile, leads to a kind of prophetic hint that the scene we have witnessed is not the last scene. There is a different and better state of affairs that is about to come. And we notice that this hope is not conveyed by plain prose or "she lives in hope," those kind of words. As a matter of fact, it is glimpsed through imagination and the poet's intuition and conveyed in a form of an indirect, subtle suggestion.